Great. So today we will be talking about DBT and CI/CD. So the topic is basically we're going to cover kind of an overview of DBT. We've done a talk on it before in the Dallas BI group. We're going to do a quick overview of what the tool is, what it does for those of you who may not be aware of what the tool is and what it's what the purpose is. Then we'll talk more about like what type of basically what type of repository setup we'll be dealing with in the demo, and specifically like the concept of scaling your projects within DBT. We'll kind of talk about the project structure, you know, of what a DBT project looks like. And if you're an organization that is basically looking to scale out, right? Like, because most organizations don't have, just one team, it's multiple teams working on multiple projects. So we'll talk about different approaches that work as far as scaling out your DBT project. But the demo that's going to be focus of this talk, we'll talk about kind of one particular setup to walk the demo with, but we'll talk about other options as well. We'll talk about the kind of sample project flow from a CID perspective, and then we'll jump into the demo. We'll kind of kick over into the DBT Cloud. That's what I'll be using. I won't be using DBT Core, the CLI version. I'll be using DBT Cloud and integration with Git. And we'll be using GitHub account and show how that integrates with DBT. So why do we use DBT? Basically, as you can see, most kind of data warehouse implementations in the cloud, instead of doing ETL, we do ELT. We basically ingest a bunch of data into a data warehouse. Then we do some transformations, and then the data is served up to different applications like BI reports and other users. So DBT basically lives in this layer here, right? DBT is not a tool you want to use to ingest data from different applications into your data warehouse or your data lake. It's once the data is inside your data lake or your data warehouse, that's where DBT plays a role, right? So basically it's once the data has landed in your data warehouse, and now you need to transform it, and you need to create kind of different materializations, your tables and views, or do incremental loads to serve up applications that are going to be used by BI folks. And basically, for those of you that might be not familiar with like a term that's coined these days, it's the analytics engineer, right? Like you've got your data engineers that are pretty much, they were like the kind of the wider umbrella of kind of folks dealing with data, but now it's kind of in the more and more cloud applications that I've been part of, there's more finer granularity. There's like a data engineering team that brings the data into the warehouse, so they'll be at this level, right? And then once the data is in there, you have the analytics engineers that are kind of they know, they have the business and the domain knowledge to kind of do the transformations and serve up the data. And so in a sample DBT project, what is in a sample DBT project repo, what type of files do you have, right? So there's generally two type of files that DBT project will have that you'll kind of track in your repository. One of them is going to be like a bunch of SQL files, not SQL files, right? So you're going to have files broken out into different kind of sections of a DBT project. Like you're going to have your models, your macros, your tests, snapshots, seed. So you're going to have a bunch of those files that may be, SQL files. Obviously, the model files or the SQL files are to actually materialize your views and your tables and your incremental loads or your ephemeral, models. And then you're going to have YAML files that are more configurations, right? So In the model folder, you may have configurations to perform tests, for example. You may have configurations at the project level to set up your project. You know how, so maybe you can have those YAML files at the project level, or how the tables are going to materialize, you know, as a default, for example. You can set that up. You can specify which database a project's going to write to, where a custom schema, maybe we're going to talk through as part of this talk, where a custom schema might write, right? So, so those files are basically we're going to be kind of covering through. So let me actually kind of jump over to the DBT Cloud just to show the type of file. So this is what I'm kind of talking about. You're going to have your DBT folder that that's going to be basically, when you initialize a DBT project, kind of these are the different folders that are going to be structured, and you're going to have different files. You're going to have a dot, for example, this is the macro that I wrote. It's a cents to dollars, it's .sql, or you may have a bunch of other kind of model files broken out into different folders. I have kind of simple test files like a.sql, b.sql, split on different folders. And then at the bottom here, I've got my kind of project YAML file, which is also going to be part of my, you know, that's a project configuration that I'm going to have at the project level. That's going to be part of my DBT project. So basically all this is part of my DBT project, and that's going to get stored into my you know, Git repository when I'm kind of doing my CI/CD. You know, when I'm going to be working, you know, inside this for a particular branch in a particular repo. I'll be working on my models. I'll be working on these configurations, and then that's when I'm going to end up deploying. So let me jump back into the slide. So we'll get deeper into that, the different type of files, and kind of how, so some of those configurations, what we need to set up to make the CI/CD work with DBT. And so the type of project I will have one project and one repository that I'm going to walk through, right? So as I mentioned earlier, for example, the clients that I've worked with, as teams get bigger and bigger and bigger, you're not going to necessarily be able to follow this model, right? So you're not going to be able to have kind of one project and one repository for all your team members, right? So in a typical data warehouse environment, you know, you may have different teams working on it. You may have sales team, they have a bunch of models. You may have finance team with a bunch of models, marketing team with a bunch of models. And then the configurations that we talked about, the project level configurations, they're defined at the top level, right? They're defined with, you know, at the top level of kind of that the whole project is going to be able to use, right? So as you can probably just see from the structure, right? If, you know, the marketing team has their developers working in the same project off the same repo, and they and basically it's split out by folders, right? So there's a very high chance that they might step into another team's kind of folder and kind of mess up their you know, the models that they've been working on. So there is a tendency to kind of step on each other's toes with it, but so DBT, you know, they do have recommendations, different type of recommendations on what to do to scale out your projects. But for the purpose of this demo, this is the implementation that I'm going to be using. I'm going to have one project and one repository that I'm going to be tracking my changes through, and I'm going to have different folders signifying like different team members I might be running, and how we would set up kind of deployments of those models across environments, and set up jobs to kind of have some level of delineation. But with this approach, you know, that is a problem of kind of different teams sharing the same repository and stepping on each other's toes. But the benefit obviously of this is, for those of you a little bit familiar with DBT, you have the concept of DAGs, right? Where a model you define, it is it's basically all the dependencies that you have inside a DBT model, you're able to you're able to see if I run a model, right? If I have for example, a customer dimension here, right? A customer model that I define, and it's used by finance, marketing, sales, all these different teams are using it. If I define it and if I make an update to the model, DBT and the DAG that it builds based on the dependencies it has, all these teams will be able to identify that, hey, this model has a link for us. We need to run this model before we run any subsequent other models that are dependent on this. So those dependencies inside DBT, with DAGs, those are enforced in one model, like pretty much standard out of the box. So that makes it easier to work within one project, one repository. And by and large, DBT kind of recommends this, as a standard to kind of start out with. The other option I'll kind of mention, but this is something DBT kind of supports as well. Actually, before I go on, does anybody not know what a DAG is? And because I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit about what what DBT does. I'm assuming certain knowledge of DBT. Does everybody know what a DAG is in a DBT model, or should I talk about that a little bit more?
So Ali, I know what a DAG is, but I don't have enough depth.
Okay.
So if you could go into it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
That would be nice.
Sure.
And one other question, are you going to be able to share these slides?
Yes. I'll be able to share the slide and the presentation, the recording. I'll post it on the BI group and for folks to have. So basically, I've got so these are all the different models, right? I have here. So I've got, as you can see, as I was showing, this is one repo, and the different teams I talked about, right? The different marketing team, sales team. So I kind of split them up into PRA, PRB, PRC, right? Those are different kind of team A, team B, team C, right? But pretty much everything that's in a model, right? And a model is basically a select statement, right? For example, this model here, right? I have, all it is a select statement, right? Anything, it's a Dallas BI test.sql. It has, it's basically just a select statement with bunch of unions in it, right? So give me just a second here. Compilation error. Let me refresh this here. So let me go into another branch here. Apologies here. I'm in a different, switch over into the analytics project here. I had some models predefined here, but see right here. So in my analytics project, basically I've got my kind of this project had the model that I was looking for. Basically, so I've got this particular model. So a model is basically a less select statement, right? So in DBT, what we're building here, right, are basically select statements, right? So I've got some dummy select statement where I'm just unioning a bunch of tables together. I mean, a bunch of rows together, which is this Dallas BI test.sql. Now, I've got a bunch of other tables that use the same model as a dependency, right? So let me go into one of them, this adapter, or actually let me go into Seha Inc. One right here. So you see, now I'm in this model, and this model is referencing the Dallas BI model, right? So in the Dallas BI, all I'm doing is just doing select one as ID, pat1 as patient name, current timestamp as load date, right? And I'm creating a bunch of these together. And then the Seha Inc. is saying select star from, I'm basically building an incremental model from this Dallas BI test table. And it's saying that select star from this table, and I'm using this ref function, right? And because I use the ref function, it kind of takes over, it realizes that there's a dependency, right? So I'm in the DAG for the Seha Inc., and it knows that has a dependency on the Dallas BI test. So if I'm running basically the model, you know, I do a DBT run command here. I do a DBT run and I run my whole model. DBT automatically knows to run the Dallas BI test before it runs the Seha Inc. Does that make sense? And essentially that's what we mean by you know, by the DAG, you know, that the you've got dependencies in here that are captured as part of you know, using that ref function that we use here. The ref function, it lets it know to kind of go from to go through the dependencies to be able to track them, right? So if you've got one repo and kind of one project, you're able to essentially track your you know, track your dependencies across all the teams that are working, right? So that's one of the benefits I was trying to highlight with you know, using having that one repo and basically here you have one repo and multiple teams using the same model. This is the benefit I was referring to. So the other option, like where a lot of teams, when they're working on you know, larger teams where they can't have this model, DBT has other options it goes through, right? One of the options that it goes through is having like a separate team repository. So this is the market team gets their own repository, finance team gets their own repository, but there's a shared repository with kind of shared macros, shared models that are used by, you know, multiple kind of different teams here. So as part of this, you're going to have you know, pretty much if you have certain configurations you want everybody in the across the team to be able to use, certain macros that you develop, certain you know, configurations that you have that if a team shouldn't have to know anything about, right? Like they should just follow those configurations. You could have a shared repo with shared macros that everybody uses, and then the models that they're developing, anything custom that they're doing to build those models, you can have that in your you know, in their own kind of team repo. And they mentioned something called packages. So DBT has something called packages where if you have that configuration, for example, they've got a lot of packages for testing and creating tests. You can have those packages even for configurations from the shared repo, and you can push them out to all the individual team repos to be able to use and leverage. So obviously this approach, I will not be using this approach, but the benefit of this approach is that you've got this approach is that you've got your each team has their own repo that they're working in, and basically you're not stepping on each other's toes, right? But obviously the drawback is there's a lot of custom configuration required, but for larger teams, this is an option that DBT has and their supports. And DBT mentions 2 other options that I've got a link here that talks about them, right? So that's something we can, you know, I'm going to have in the slide deck that if you want to kind of read up on and kind of what packages are and how to implement them, the articles kind of talks about how to implement this option. So even though I won't use it, I've kind of referenced it here in case you're wondering about kind of larger implementations. So what we will do is first I'm gonna create a project, you know, from scratch. I'm gonna walk through the steps there. We're basically gonna have you know, GitHub as our repository. So I'm gonna work with the dev branch. From a dev branch, I'm basically gonna be introducing a concept called you know, an environment within DBT. We're gonna walk through how kind of take a dev branch, deploy it to a DBT environment. We'll have a profile with our development credentials, and I'll be using Snowflake as for this demo. We'll take that dev branch and we'll show how it uses the credentials in the environment to deploy to you know, our Snowflake environment. Then we'll talk about custom schemas, and this becomes important. Pretty much most organizations when they're trying to deploy their models, there's default functionality that DBT has when you're deploying models, or especially if you're trying to execute jobs. Excuse me.
Practice பண்ணுவோம்.
I think somebody have a question or just background noise?
அப்ப வெயிட் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்காங்க ஒரு நேரம் ஒல்றக்குள்ளர கூப்பிடவே இல்ல.
Yeah, I think
Ani?
I think Arun maybe. I think you might not be on mute. Thank you. So yeah. So basically, you know, we'll kind of walk through kind of creating custom schemas, being able to taking the default functionality in DBT has and kind of modifying it for our schema, like our schema creation. And you know, and we're going to deploy our dev jobs to kind of multiple schemas and show how that works. Then we're going to take the dev branch, publish it to like a prod branch, right? You know, obviously, typically when we do deployments, we do it from, you know, different feature branches to the main branch. I think it doesn't. Basically, DBT would work the same if you do it in the main branch or a prod branch. So I'll kind of create a custom branch to show that functionality, and then from there we'll kind of deploy to a DBT kind of a prod environment. We'll create different jobs that we can do in. This is going to be a dev environment. There's going to be a deployment environment, and in the deployment environment, you can create jobs, right? Like basically, you can schedule different jobs. We'll do that here, and then we'll do the same function, you know, deploying, you know, the models that we have in job 1 to schema 1, job 2 to schema 2. And we'll also touch base on other concepts like targets, environment variables, and kind of different project configurations we have to do to make this work. So with that, I'll jump over into our DBT environment. And basically for what I will do, actually, since I think some of you guys are new here and you haven't worked with DBT before, if, I wish I haven't kind of set up a poll or anything, but just kind of take a sample from the room or in the chat, if you guys can post. Has somebody seen like creation of a project from scratch in DBT Cloud, or is that an experience you guys already have? Like I'm trying to get an idea of you know, how new folks are to DBT. Okay. Other folks, if you don't mind kind of responding, you know, because otherwise then I'll go, you know, from scratch, kind of define how to create a project from scratch. And okay, got it. You know, so 2 folks have responded so far. If okay, it seems everybody would benefit from that. Quite a few people would benefit. So let me kind of go from that. Okay, so you guys are able to see my screen here. I'm in my browser. So what I'm using is Snowflake for my testing, right? So I'm gonna go in. I'm in my DBT Cloud. You can create a free account. I'm gonna go into account settings here, and I've got a couple of projects here, and I'm gonna create a brand new project. Okay, and I'm gonna walk through how to set that up. Okay, so you're in DBT Cloud, you create an account, you go to the hamburger menu to the left, you know, go to account settings, and you know, you create a new project. So as part of the project, we're going to go to begin. I'm gonna do a you know, test DBT project, give it a name. Next, I'm gonna pick Snowflake as my account. So my connection, his name is Snowflake, and then you need an account, right? It's one of the things with DBT, it doesn't really tell you what an account is for Snowflake. But if I jump over into my Snowflake, basically an account, a Snowflake, basically a Snowflake URL is basically your account, which is right here, .snowflakecomputing.com, right? So the account is this piece here, this from this Azure down to the YI007, right? This is my account. So I go in here, I'm gonna type, this is my account. Role, I have a role created in DBT, which is basically Ali role, and it's got access to different environments. But you know, you can specify that here. I've got Ali prod, Ali role. But you know, for this, I might just do the account admin because I'm not really showing DBT to kind of just make it easier while we're doing the deployments. But this is where you would go ahead and you would obviously you would have different roles that when you're doing your deployments, when we create an environment, you would have a different type of role, different type of setup, versus this right here, we're setting up a user profile, right? Like, so this would be, you know, me as a developer, and I'm trying to set up my DBT Cloud, and I'm giving my credentials to log into DBT, and whatever access I have in Snowflake will be used here to connect to, from DBT to connect to Snowflake, right? So my database here, I'm gonna have dev as my database. I'm gonna use this dev database. My warehouse, this is basically for those that, you know a little bit about, Snowflake. Basically, this is your compute capabilities, you know, what Snowflake uses to run, and what you're essentially charged for is the compute on your compute warehouse, right? So my compute warehouse is this, and it's basically a small, and I'm going to put that here. And then I've got username and password. You also have the option to put in a key pair, but you know, I'm not going to do that. We'll talk about targets a little bit. Basically, this is whatever credentials and setup you have that will run your job. That's a target in DBT. When you are trying to run your jobs, you're able to specify how DBT, what should happen based on a target that you define here. For here, I'll leave it default. We'll come back to this and we'll show how we can change it to define certain configurations messing with this target. But for now, I'll leave it default. As far as schema, this is the schema in Snowflake. Now, as you'll notice here, what DBT recommends when you're doing development, they say that every user should have their own schema. So if I'm in this dev database, right, each user should have their own schema. So instead of a schema for team or project, they say, hey, I'm Ali, I should have my own schema. There is, someone else, user X, they have their own schema. And everybody does their development in their own schemas within Snowflake. And that's where DBT is writing stuff to, right? Most organizations are not cool with that, right? Like you're gonna want to pick one schema where, where you do the development. So I'm gonna go with that approach instead of using the schema that they gave with the DBT underscore, say a consulting or whatever. I'm gonna have this schema that I already created, team A, and I'm gonna put that here. Okay. So this is my setup, and I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna test my. Let me put in a password just in case. And I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna test my connection. So connection succeeded. I'm gonna continue. And like I said, I'm gonna set up a GitHub repository here. So I've already got a repository set up, but let me go in and see if I can create another one. Let me create a new repository. I'm going to call it, Dallas BI. Okay. So this is a new repository. I'm going to create it. And if I go here, oops, sorry, supposed to go on DBT. Oh shoot, I think it overrode everything. Give me just a second here. Go back here, get my account. Let's do role database dev. Compute underscore hub. Okay, test my connection. Continue. Why did it do that? Okay, database connection. Repository. Actually, it's not pulling my repository from GitHub here. So let me go in here. Let me come back to this step.
Oh, isn't the name different? Because right here I see test DBT, and on the other one I saw DBT test.
Oh, this is my project here.
Oh, okay.
Let me go in here and this is my DBT Git repository. Okay, I had to give access to this repository as well. So now, once I go in here to my team, go to account settings in this project, configure repository, go to GitHub. I have this Dallas BI repository. So this was a repository I had already. I just created a Dallas BI repository here. So I'm going to pick this repository. And so this is set up, and I'm going to go into develop. So now that Dallas BI, so test DBT is my project, and Dallas BI, basically this repository, Dallas BI is my repository that DBT is connected to. So refresh it here. Okay, so I'm in my branch here. First, you're gonna initialize your projects. Basically, DBT has some kind of files it creates, like this folder structure. That's what we're initializing here. We're gonna go into commit. We're gonna initialize project. And right now I'm in the main branch, right? So I'm in the main branch. It's going to make me create a new branch. That's going to be my, development branch, as I mentioned in the PowerPoint. So my branch name is going to be dev here. And now that if I go back into my branches, basically, I go to my Dallas BI branch, you'll see I've got main, and the dev that I created shows up here. I created it in DBT, but the integration's there that it shows up in GitHub as well. So I'm going to work mainly in my dev branch. Okay, so a couple of things I'm going to do. Basically, when you create a project in DBT, you've got certain files that are predefined. Like DBT gives you certain models, basically it's just select one, union all, select null. That's materialized as a table. Then they give you a view. Here, this second DBT model, they give you a YAML file. So what I'm going to do, like what I had in my previous project, I'm going to have a new folder. I'm going to create 2 new folders. It's going to be PRA. I'm going to create another folder. Oh, not file. I'm going to create another folder. B. And within these files, within these folders now, I'm going to create some more SQL files, right? So I've got some code here that I'm going to execute. So PRA is going to be just this code. So the way you create a model, you just go into models, new file, and you have to have a, I'm going to call it table a.sql. You got to have a .sql in front of it in order for you to, in order for DBT to know that it's a select statement in a model, you have to execute. So table a.sql, I'm going to have this. So I'm telling it this is materialized as a table. It has basically 4 rows, basically different names of people. And when you run these, it's going to give you, you can do a preview. And it's going to basically give you a name 1 column with these 4 names in it, right? So right now, this SQL that I just ran, it's actually running in Snowflake, right? If I go to history, and I do a refresh, you see this SQL statement just executed, right? So even though I'm executing a preview here, it's actually running in Snowflake using the credential I defined up there, right? So one thing in here actually is I want it to be one mistake I made here is that I wanted it to be in the PRA folder, not in here. So let me do this again. We go into the PRA.new file and have table A1. I'm going to have this. So this one I'll delete. So the difference between having that model that I had before, it was under the models folder, whereas this table A1 I created in the PRA folder, right? So remember, this is what I was saying. If you have one project and you've got multiple teams using it, I showed that example where each team has their own folder, right? And then each team within that folder, they would have to have, a SQL that they drop into it. And that's what will be saved there. So just as I showed here, it could get messy if you've got a bunch of SQL statements here and somebody creates a model outside of the folder that they're supposed to create it in. It's not like optimal, right? To have many teams using one repo, right? That was a case in point. So with this, I've got my SQL statement. I'm saying it should be materialized as a view. This basically means that, materialized as a table. This basically means that within Snowflake, I want this to run as a table, right? And it's going to use the configurations I set up when I set up the project. It's going to go into the dev database and the team A schema, right? So to do that, I'm going to commit it. I got to save the changes first. I'm going to commit it, create table A1. I'm going to commit it. And now these are committed to my dev branch. And I'm going to run this model. I'm going to do DBT run. If I do DBT run, it's going to run every model that's in the models folder, right? Any select statement that's in the models folder, it's going to run it. But if I want to specify one particular one, I can do that with run select table A1, okay? Table A1. So this is just going to run this table A1. And if I click enter, this ought to create a table. So it's going to create a table in the team A schema. So if I go to my database, let me go to worksheets here. I go here, you see team A has no tables in here. I'm going to refresh it. And now I should see a table A1 here. Table A1, you see, was created. It's got 4 rows. If I do select from team A dot table A1, and if I run this is going to have the 4. So essentially, we just created a model with the table. So I'm going to create another one here in PRB. Create a new file here. Call it table b2.sql. And in here, I'm going to paste another file here. Basically similar concept. Instead of just a name, I'm having an ID, and I actually need to put in the materialization as well. Because the materialization tells you what it should be configured at. Should it be a table? Should it be a view? If you change it to a view, it'll be a view up here. So I'm going to do a quick preview here. Okay, this works, but nothing so far. When you do a preview, it doesn't actually create the table, right, in Snowflake, in your target database. You got to save it. You got to commit it, table B2, and then you have to I will have to do a run here, table B2, and I click enter, and this is also going to get created in the team A schema, right? So I go here, I refresh it. Now there's a table B2 as well, right? And if I do another select from there, you'll notice it's got basically different columns in my snowflake, the person A, person A, B, C, right? And I've got some duplicates here. I won't go into the testing and how you set up tests and whatnot, but basically you can set up tests in DBT that says that, hey, check my column, does it have any duplicates? If it does, it throws an error when you're running your jobs, right? Because most of these databases, like a Snowflake, it doesn't force primary key constraints. So you have to set up, you can set up tests in DBT to let you know when there's duplicates and a whole bunch of other tests that DBT has. I won't go into that here, but that functionality does exist. I'm mainly focusing on the CI/CD pieces of it. So now I've got two tables here, right? So as I mentioned earlier, what we just executed, what it's running with, it's actually running with the configurations we set up when we set up the project, right? Remember when we set it up, we specified our role, our username, password that we connected, we specified a database, and we specified a schema, right? The team A schema in our profile. In case you guys forgot, I'll kind of show you how to get there. You go up here in your profile. Within your profile, all the different projects you have, it'll have their settings. So I go in here and you can see what you set it up as. I set it up, team A, and dev is my database. So right now, everything is normal. We're doing our development. It writes to the team A schema, perfect, right? Now, what if I want one of the tables, right, to write to one schema, but I want the other one to write to another schema, right? How can I enforce that? There's something in DBT called, using custom schemas, right? You can specify a configuration within DBT to, in your configuration file to use certain schemas. So that's what we'll do. We'll tell in the schema configuration. So we'll go back to our project. Any questions so far? Is this pretty straightforward? This is basic SQL. You're running SQL and you're telling it how to create an object in the target. That's all pretty straightforward so far. But any questions?
Quick question. Are you going to get into GitHub Actions as part of the CI/CD process?
So what we'll talk about is I'm going to talk about, let me go back to my slide deck here. What I'm going to talk about is basically, I'm basically going to talk about setting up on a lot more, the focus is on the DBT side, right? How to set up environments, how to set up, your project variables, and how to set up, the different configurations so that when you're doing your CI/CD, there is kind of control over where you're deploying to. What I'll cover on the GitHub side is basically, the setup where if you have a project or if you have a project in DBT, you want to do a couple things. You want to do a pull request from one branch into another, how to set that up, how to execute that. Then we're going to have, basically at that point, it takes you to the GitHub UI, essentially, right? From there, we're going to show, if you want to set up your, basically reviewers and who's going to review it before you kind of, do the merges. And then once you do the, merge the branches together, then we're going to show that how you're going to basically you can set up the jobs to execute automatically when basically once like a merge is done from one branch into another. So that's going to be the extent of the demo.
Okay.
Was there anything in particular you're trying to
No, and that's just something I can read up on later. But I think, so what it sounds like here is what we will see is, hey, so now I'm going to make a change to this feature branch that ultimately I want to do a pull request into the main branch for,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so then this will show me from start to finish how to, and I get what you're saying about the reviewers and all that stuff, right? But then ultimately how this one change in this one feature branch will end up in main. In the main
your
branch.
target branch, which could be the main branch, or I'm probably going to create another product.
Okay, got it. Okay, cool.
That's what
Awesome.
Yep.
This is really good so far. Thank you.
Cool. So, great. So we talked about, so far we've created a model and we've talked about custom scheme. We've talked about, okay, now we want to create custom schema. We want to take, model this table A1, we want to put it into one schema. This table B2, we want to put it into another schema. So where we set that up is in the project.yaml file, right? So basically in here under my models, in this YAML file, I can specify where I want certain configurations to happen. So you guys see there's, by default, whenever you initialize a project, there's an example folder, right?
I think that's on your other screen. Sorry.
I'm sorry?
I think
I'm
that's
still
on
on
your
the other
other
screen. Sorry, my bad. Can you guys see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so as I was saying, there's an example folder that comes by default. I created a PRA, PRB folder, and basically in here, I can set up custom schemas, right? So you just go into your YAML file here in the DBT project, and I say, okay, PRA, and I say, schema is going to be, I want PRA to go into the team B schema. And so basically what this is saying is any SQL file that's in the PRA schema, PRA folder is going to go into the team B schema. Make sense? And then I can do the same thing with PRB, that, hey, anything in this folder, it goes into the, I can create a new schema here. I'll leave it as like I'll say, okay, write it to the team A schema. Now, there's some issues that happen with this, right? And let's save it, let's commit it, and just do the same runs that we just did, right? To show what will happen, right? So added custom schema. So essentially, we just executed these statements and we saw that it wrote everything into the team A schema, no problem. Now I'm saying to write PRA into, team B, PRB into team A. So, and under PRB, I've got basically this table B2. So what this is saying is table B2 should get written into the team A schema. So, and then table A1 should be into the team B schema. So we just executed table B2. Let's run it again and see what happens now, okay? You notice I've basically just got two schemas in here in my dev environment, team A, team B. But once we run it, we're expecting to see basically this to go into the team A schema, but let's see what happens. So we run it and so we notice, you see it created a table and model team A underscore team A, table B2, right? It didn't just do it in the team A. It appended another team A in front of it, right? So if we go in here you'll notice is it created another schema, team A, and it created a table B2 in here. Why is that, right? So this is where custom functionality that DBT has, like by default, DBT has this functionality where if you define a custom schema here, that functionality kicks in. And what that is it's basically this article here, using custom schemas. If you just Google DBT using custom schemas, it'll take you to this articles, and that's what it's defining. And this is what's happening. So let me walk through this code and tell you what just happened. So basically what it's saying is, if custom schema is not defined, right, use the default schema, okay? And the default schema is the target schema. Remember, the target schema for us is what we defined initially in our project, when we created the project. When we created the project was the team A schema, remember? So, but basically this condition is saying if custom schema is not defined, use the default schema. And when we initially ran our team A, team B, before we defined the custom schema, that's what it did, right? Because the first two tables it created in the team A schema, because it was the default schema. But it says that that means if there is a custom schema defined, right? Because if custom schema is not defined, do the default. Else, meaning any other condition, meaning the custom schema is defined, then append the default schema to this custom schema. And that's essentially what happened, right? We appended, it flipped to this else, and it appended default schema to custom schema. Simple way to get around that, you take this macro, right? You take this code, and we create a macro in DBT to override this functionality and tell it what to do. Okay, and for us, that's to tell it to use the custom schemas that we defined, right? And this is important because when we do GitHub, right, like when we do an automated job execution from Git, it'll also create a default schema, and Git will give its own default schema. It won't use the default schema we define. So it'll have like the pull request number _, whatever your target schema is. And we don't want that, right? If you do a merge into a branch and you kick off a job, you don't want the schema name from the pull request as part of your job, right? You want to just define where you want it to go in the target schema, in the custom schema that you find. So to override this functionality, you can copy this macro. You go into DBT and you go into the macros folder and you do a new file. And basically this file, you can name it anything you want as long as it's a .SQL, but it's a good idea to name it whatever your macro name is going to be, right? So this is our macro, and macro name is right here, right? Generate schema name. And this is going to be the functionality that's going to get overwritten when you're defining your target schema. But I'm going to give the file the same name. So I'm going to say, okay, I've got to generate schema name here from before. And then I just cut and paste the code here. So this is the default functionality that's happening, right? But I can go in here that says, that I'm going to add another condition in here that says, I'm going to copy some of the code here that I had. So I'm going to say if custom schema is not none, then use the custom schema. So what I'm saying is if this is none, then use default schema. If it's not none, use the custom schema, right? So I'm going to paste that here. So if custom schema is none, use default schema. Else if custom schema is not none, use a custom schema. Any other conditions, just use the default schema _ custom schema name, right? I could have just skipped this piece, right? And just change it here, right? That any other condition, just delete this default schema and it would be the same condition. But I want to show a few other things, so that's why I will leave that there. So now I'm saying Custom schema is not none, which is in our case is the case. We're going to save it. We're going to commit this. Custom schema macro. And then we're going to run this B2 again, right? This table B2. We're going to run it. And this should now write back to the team A schema, or actually it should, yeah, it should write back to the, basically it's going to overwrite. So first we did it at 6:15. I'm going to refresh it and it'll have a new date time in here. See, it has 6:30 as a date time. You guys see that? So this got overwritten in the team A schema that we like we wanted. And let me drop this schema here just so it doesn't team here. So I've got my table B2 here. Let me go in here and let me run. So if you notice team B still doesn't have anything, let's go back in here and run table A1. And this should, A1, and this should write the table A1 into the team B schema. Okay, this is my role situation. Let me go in here. Let me actually go in my profile in DBT and just make it an admin, account admin. So I'm going back into my profile and making it an account admin. So this way it can write to all the schemas for this purpose. So I'm going to develop, it's going to refresh the ID, it's going to pull in the configuration, and it's going to make me refresh it. So I'm in still the dev branch, pure A. I'm going to do DBT run, select table A1. I'm going to run it. And this should now create it in the team B schema, right? So it created that in the team B schema. We got the table A. There was no appending. It didn't append any default schema name or anything to it, right? So another thing that that we can do as part of this, so let me go back to my slide here, is now we want to go ahead and create our we want to deploy this to another branch, right? And that branch, we want to be able to kind of execute the jobs. As soon as something is merged into that branch, we want to be able to execute the job there, okay? So how does DBT allow you to do that, right? Because right now, I'm in a dev branch and I've got a main branch, right? And I wanna automatically set up the job so that whenever something is merged from the dev branch into my quote unquote prod branch, I want something to execute, right? In another environment, in another database, right? For this purpose, I'm using the same account, but let's say I want something to execute in the prod database, right? How would I set that up? So to do this, DBT gives you something called environments. So we go here and we go to the environments tab here. Right now, by default, when you create a project, you get a development environment here, right? You can create a new environment within DBT. Now, this is a DBT environment that has your configurations that you want to run your various branches against, right? So this could be a QA environment, prod environment, or any number of environments. So I will make this a prod environment, and the type of this is a deployment. The previous environment, our development environment, had a development tag in here, type in here. This is going to be a deployment environment. Now, for this, if I leave this custom branch checkbox, it will default to the main branch, right? So it's going to pull from the main branch if I leave this out, right? But if I want to pull from another branch to run the code, for example, like another feature branch. In my case, I'm just calling them the environment branches, like a dev, QA, prod, from like a QA branch, or I have a separate branch called prod. I would check this box and I would enter that branch name in here. This is one thing I don't like about the DBT design. It's already connected to my GitHub. It doesn't pull the branches for me, right? I have to type out the branch name here. So what I will do, I'm going to go back to Git, right? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new branch in my here in this Dallas BI. I'm gonna create a new branch. So I'm gonna call it prod. Okay. So I've got a brand new branch here. So I created this in Git, in GitHub. I'm going to cancel out of here actually, and I'm going to go into the develop. And so I'm connected to the dev branch here, but if I want to check out another branch, you guys should notice we have a prod branch shows up here. Before we only had a main dev. I created the prod branch and that shows up here. So I'm going to cancel out of here. I'm going to go back into, so I'm going to be playing around in the dev branch and the prod branch mainly, right? So I'm going to go out of here. I'm going to go into environments and I'm going to go back and create a new environment. I'm going to call it prod. Right, it's a deployment environment. This is going to read off that prod branch that I just created. Okay, it's going to read off that prod branch. It's going to use the same connection information. The role, I'll define it as account admin here as well, just because it has access to everything. But obviously, this is going to be the place for the prod environment. The dev profile that we had that had all our dev credentials for all the developers to work in. To go in here and create an environment with access to your kind of production snowflake, where you're going to be writing data to a production snowflake, you would set up a role and a user and an account that has access to this. So that's how DBT kind of separates the accounts from your dev, which is your developer, versus what's going to run in your production or your QA environments, is through these environments where you can type in the roles and the credentials that it's going to use. So I'm going to type in.
So real quick, Ali.
Yeah.
So what this is the way we can say developer A, B, and C are working on this particular repo. So we're going to just allow them to commit to certain repos, and that's it.
So the developers are basically working in that dev branch that we had, right? Like you have a branch where developers are working and they're using their own credentials, right? When you create environments, it's typically for like deploying to like a target non-dev environments.
Got it.
Okay. So when we first set up the project, right, in our DBT Cloud, and you set up your own profile, like up here, up top, this is in this profile, this is the developer that you're working with, and those credentials are what each developer is using to do their daily development. They're not going to have access to this environment setup, right? This is the DBT admin is going to be coming in here, and they're going to be setting up the environment and setting up the jobs to run. The code that's in the branch that you want to run against, the main or the prod, against these credentials that the DBT admin is defining here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. So we got the role database. We're going to change it to the prod database. Let me just make sure I called it prod. Yep. So it's the prod database, account admin, same compute warehouse, username, password, and I've got team A, team B schema up here as well. So I'm going to create the default schema here, and I'm going to save this. So I've got my prod environment created. Now within here, I could have multiple jobs that I create. Okay. So the concept were in development when we were working in DBT Cloud, remember I was typing those commands in to execute each individual job. In here, I can go and create jobs that are gonna run in that are gonna run against my environment. So a job is basically underneath your environment. So I'm gonna run, this job is gonna be table A. It's gonna run against prod. I'm gonna leave the target blank for now. I'm going to leave these blanks as well. I'm going to say select, I believe it was table A1. So I'm saying for this particular job in prod is only running table A1. Now you can add multiple commands. If you've got tests, if you've got, multiple jobs you need to run, you can set those up. And this, I'm not going to have it on a schedule. You have the option to have it on a schedule here to run at a particular time. You can have it as an API. This is a developer account, so my API is disabled, right? But if you have the enterprise account, you have the API that, if you're running it from another ETL tool, and once that ETL job finishes, you have a post command that you can call here. You can call the API to run the DBT job once that's completed from your ETL tool, like if you're running a data factory or something, right? If you don't want it to be scheduled on a particular day and time, you want it to be dependent on something else, you can use the API. What I'm going to show is this webhook. This is every time you can set this job up to run on a pull request. So within this environment, I've got this job that says that anything that's merged into the branch that the environment is set up against, which is the prod branch, I want to run this job, okay? Once I click this is what this is signifying, right? So it's saying, and then run only on custom branch, only pull requests against a configured branch prod will trigger this job, right? So I'm gonna save this here. So I've got this branch running, branch setup. And I'm also going to set up another job, a table B job that's going to run against the same environment with the same setup. I'm not going to have a target name. Select table B2. And this is not going to be on a schedule. I'm going to run it, run on pull request, run against the custom prod branch. Now we don't have anything in the prod branch, but I'm going to save this. And so I've got two jobs, table A and table B. Remember, table A is going to run against the table B schema. Table B is going to run against the table A schema. Same thing we did in our dev branch, right? So now I'm going to go, I've got my job set up, I've got my table A, table B. I'm going to go into my development and I'm in my dev branch. In dev branch, I've got my model with these folders and I've got my, custom schema here set up, to run this. I've got my macro set up. Now I want to do a pull request. So from, I click on that pull request button. So now it takes me into, GitHub. So it's really tightly integrated. I'm going to say compare dev branch and merge it into the prod branch, right? And I'm going to create my pull request. You can do your reviews here. I'm going to create the pull request. You can assign the reviewers. You can assign different folks that are going to do it. But I'm just going to go ahead, give it dev pull into merge running production jobs, and I'm going to create a pull request here. Merge.
So is there like a unit test being done when you do a pull request?
I think that's all in GitHub, right? Like you can set up reviewers, you can set up, the whatever functionality you have in your GitHub, you can set that up, right? To do your reviews. So typically, when we do merges from one branch into the other, typically we always have reviewers that are reviewing the code and that are kind of making sure that you follow standards of the code, and for example, the way you've written the code, are you using best practices? Are there any kind of known kind of performance issues with the code that you're writing, depending on the platform you're at? That is going to be all whatever you set up, whatever your process is in GitHub, right? This I'm just showing that you've done that, and now basically you're doing the merge.
So real quick, Ali, just a comment. I just saw a presentation yesterday on SQL Fluff, which is basically a linter to apply like data quality rules, like and formatting rules, like removing white space and stuff like that. So I thought that was interesting. Maybe something for the future.
No, let's keep that in mind. So I mean, most
I think I consider mostly is like unit test scenarios. So say you change a field, the logic of that field, like is there going to be a golden test in which you run a golden file or something to test any type of ETL changes or something like that? Which like
that.
If that makes sense, because we use Jenkins already, right? Like if you're gonna replace CI/CD of Jenkins, then it still sounds like we need Jenkins to do some of the CI/CD testing.
So when we talk about tests within DBT, let me do this merge request and just show the jobs pulling. Then let me talk about the testing that you have in DBT before that that you can use to leverage, I think, some of the things that you're talking about. So in here, I'm going to go into DBT. I'm going to go into my environment and go on the prod here. I'm going to go into my jobs. So my jobs here. Okay, so these executed. So if I go in here in my prod, I should have the tables that I created, right? So going back to tests, right? So within DBT, this is not Git tests, right? Now I'm talking about tests in DBT. So DBT has a bunch of ways you can do testing, kind of the testing that you would normally do. Where I've used well, like GitHub for review, it's like for peer reviews, right? So if I have a developer who wants to review another developer's code, we want to have a process, right? So to do like knowledge sharing and making sure that everybody knows each other's code. That's where I kind of used GitHub to, where you assign a reviewer, they review the code and they approve it before it's, it's merged in. But a lot of the heavy lifting and type of tests you guys are talking about, as far as, making sure the code that you have, it doesn't have errors, it doesn't have issues, kind of like what I was talking about, unique constraints. DBT gives you a lot of that, right? So you have tests that are out of the box with DBT, and then you have tests that are, you can kind of configure, like download as packages. So, and then the third type of test, you can write SQL statements in a way such that if it returns a result, that means that that test has failed, right? So if you guys want, I can talk about those here. I can talk about the one where you write the SQL statement here, because I think that's pretty like self-explanatory. It's more SQL, but I'll at a high level, I'll refer to the other tests they give you in the example folder as well. So in the example folder, in the schema.yml, you notice, so these are the models that DBT gives you like out of the box, out of any project, right? So you notice in the schema.yml, it's saying this is the model where this configuration applies. The name is my first DBT model, and then it goes into description. It has columns, names. On the column name ID, it has a description, then it has a test here, unique and not null, right? DBT has 4 types of tests: the unique, not null, accepted value, and I believe like you can do like primary key, foreign key constraints, right? So those tests you can define here, right? What if you want other functionality? What if you want things like, for example, you want to make sure the data type of a certain column is enforced as part of this, right? So for example, if I want to make sure that the column that I have has to have like an integer in it, for example, right? DBT gives you a lot of packages to do these. So, well, I'm on Google. So DBT expectations is a package that gives you a lot of functionality to do some of these tests, right? You can do tests, do you expect the column to exist? I mean, there's just a lot in here, right? The table column, expect the number of columns in a model to be equal to the number of columns that you have, right? You can expect the number of columns that exactly match a specified list. I mean, there's hundreds of tests in here, right? But this is a package. This is not out of the box. So this would not be something I would say you do in GitHub, right? This is something you define as part of your DBT project, right? I would download the DBT expectations package, right? I would bring this package into my project, right? I would install it, and there's some dependencies you have to do. You have to have in your project.yaml file, you have to have the time zone specified, and this way you can run those tests, right? So there's out of the box, there's packages like these, right? And I believe there's like another one which is really useful one, DBT. I think it's like a meta testing package, I think it's called. I think it's this one. This is another one which has a lot of examples here. I think that's what it is. Yeah, for example, I think some of the things that I know a lot of customers that run DBT, you want to make sure when you submit a model, it has a test with it, right? Some people, they enforce these conditions, right? That, hey, our standard best practice that you cannot check a model in, to the repo without having a test associated with it, right? You cannot check a model in without having documentation defined for it, right? So still, I mean, you got to define the tests. What do you want to test on it, right? But you know, those tests you can define here, right? You can define the conditions that, hey, that does a particular model have a test associated with it, you know, if that's the case, you know, that test passes for that model, right? The last condition is you having this SQL, right? You can write custom SQL. In my case, I have a, you know, the simple model here, table A, right? And it's basically pulling, you know, 3 values from a table here, right? I can write a test that says, in a way such that if the SQL pulls a result back, then that test has failed, right? So in this case, I'm in the dev branch. Let me go into dev here I'm in table A1. Select star from table A1 where name1 equals Ollie, right? Okay, so this is my test. I'm just saying if this row comes back with a result, this test has failed. So I can go into my test and I can add a new file, you know, fail table A. Fail A, let me just call it fail A, that's easier. Well, actually, it has to be .SQL. So within this, I just type a SQL statement that, hey, select star, from dev, and this returns a row, right? So this, in order to enforce this, I have to use that ref function. Remember I showed at the beginning that I have to reference the model. So right now I'm referencing the actual table that exists in Snowflake. You can, for this to work, I can't use the table name. Then it won't work. It has to know that I'm referring to this table A1 model. How do I do that? Use a ref function, right? So the ref function, it's like this I showed earlier. This ref function, I go in here, I put in it like this, table A1. I'm pretty sure it's case sensitive as well. So I will need to do it like table A1. Okay, so now if I do the lineage, if I do preview, it still brings it back, right? But if I do the lineage here, it'll have a link that, hey, that this, well, actually, no, it doesn't show it for this, actually, my bad. But if I run the test now, actually commit the code. Oh, shoot, save it. Save it, and test from A. And I can do a test. So I do DBT test, and I'm saying my model is select table A1, right? So first I was doing a run, which is separate. Now I'm doing a test. So I'm saying test table A1, and it's going to come back and it's going to check all the tests. That DBT expectation if I have it, those out of the box tests if I have it, and any SQL I defined here, as long as I use this ref function, right? So if I do a test here, this should fail because that is bringing a row back. See, this failed, test failed, A failed. Now, how do I make it part of my deployment? Remember where we went into our jobs, right? I've got this job here. There were multiple commands I could do, right, to run my job. And within those jobs, you guys might remember, I only had one command in there. Environment, my prod, my jobs for my table A. I'm not sure. Oh, did I schedule this? Let's schedule this. Why is it queued? Here. Let me just go in here real quick. I'm not sure why I was queued, but if I go in here, remember I had a bunch of different commands. I could add a command here and I could do that DBT test, select, table A1. So the test that I defined before, I can make it part of the job, and I can have it set up so that every time you check in a model, you make sure you have a test associated with it. And then as part of your jobs, not only do you run the models, you also have tests that are running with it that you make sure that, oh, I think that's the reason I didn't uncheck this. That's why it's running on a schedule every 1 hour at midnight at 7 it ran. So my bad on that. So once you have it, you run it. And this way it'll kind of do this will do a lot more robust testing, right? Than just doing like a peer review or a code review, right? But this can be part of your model kind of job execution as well.
So real quick, one scenario that I can think of, Ali, like for example, on the custom SQL tests, would be like a credit, like a bank, and one of their tests is we never give anybody an interest rate lower than 2%. Mm-hmm. So you would run a min on a granted interest rate for a loan. And if it kicks out anything less than that, you know that there's something wrong with your data. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah. I mean, those are very suitable for the for like the SQL tests, right? Because they're very like domain specific, right? They're very specific to the data that you have, right? Yeah, that would be. I mean, that's very powerful. That's one of the things I know that a lot of people love about the DBT tool. These tests that they have. You can define a custom SQL test. So I know that's the folks I work with. That's a very neat thing. It's a very flexible thing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that's the end of the presentation, guys. I will try to kind of stop the recording and post any questions that you guys have. Beyond this, you guys can email me or kind of message me on the BI group, but I'll post anything more that you guys have, via my the Dallas BI group page. Any other questions here while we're here, actually?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm joining a little bit late, but I don't know if this was mentioned prior. Could you show off any like integration with like data catalog services or lineaging that DBT generates, and how does it integrate with like other technologies in the market? So
we briefly covered it, in the recording where we had. Let me stop the recording actually, because I think we covered this.